We will be starting in 10 minutes. For today's forum, we are providing simultaneous translation from English to Korean and vice versa. Please check out the button for translation. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2023 Seoul International Forum on Elections, hosted by the National Election Commission or the NEC of the Republic of Korea. This is Soo-won Lee from the Overseas Elections Division, and I'll be your MC for this forum today. This forum is an annual gathering of election experts and officials from all over the world. We had invited participants to Seoul until 2019 before the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. However, until this year, we are hosting the forum online. We are still very honored to have you here and welcome everybody joining this forum. Today, we will have two sessions focused on issues important to election management under the overall theme of sustainable elections towards a better future. Before we begin the forum, we have opening remarks from the chairperson and congratulatory remarks to open the forum. Firstly, I would like to introduce our host today, the chairperson of the National Election Commission of the Republic of Korea, the Honorable Justice Roh Tae-ok, who will open the forum. Chairperson Roh was appointed as a justice of the Supreme Court in 2020 and has been serving as the chairperson of the NEC since May 2022. During his career, Chairperson Roh has held several senior posts in the Korean legal system, including presiding judge of the Seoul High Court and chief judge of Seoul Northern District Court. Now the chairperson's opening remarks will be delivered. Please understand that the chairperson prepared his opening remarks in the video as he is not able to join the forum in real time today due to other unavoidable schedules. Let's meet him on the screen.
존경하는 각국의 선거기관과 국제기구 관계자 여러분, 그리고 국내외 귀빈 여러분, 2023년 서울국제선거포럼 개회를 선언합니다. 먼저 이 자리를 빛내주기 위해 축사 영상을 보내주신 스벤 올링 주한 덴마크 대사님과 장인식 A웹 사무총장님께 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 또한 오늘 포럼에서 전문 지식과 고견을 들려주실 사회자와 발제자 여러분, 그리고 이 자리에 함께해 주시는 모든 청중 여러분께 진심 어린 환영 인사를 드립니다. 서울국제선거포럼은 대한민국 중앙선거관리위원회가 지난 2015년 처음 개최한 이후 어느덧 9번째를 맞이하였습니다. 이 포럼은 선거제도와 각종 선거 현안에 대하여 전 세계의 전문가들이 모여 깊이 있고 현장감 있는 의견들을 서로 나누며 교류할 수 있는 공론의 장을 만들고자 하는 뜻에서 시작되었습니다. 아무쪼록 이 자리가 지속 가능한 민주주의의 발전을 위해서 함께 고민하고 지혜를 나누는 의미 있는 시간이 되기를 희망합니다. 최근 과학기술의 발전으로 인해 우리 사회는 놀라울 정도로 빠르게 변화하고 있습니다. 민주주의에 있어서도 국민의 정치적 의사표현과 직접적인 정치 참여의 모습이 과거와 비교할 수 없을 정도로 급격하게 질적으로 양적으로 증가하고 있습니다. 그러나 다른 한편으로는 정확하지 않는 정보, 가짜 뉴스의 생성과 급격한 확산, 이념적 편향성 및 그로 인한 극한 대립으로 인하여 민주주의의 위기를 맞이한 것은 아닌가 하는 우려도 나오고 있습니다. 정도의 차이는 있겠지만 전 세계 민주주의 국가가 같은 입장에서 해결책을 찾아야 할 당면 과제입니다. 이에 이번 포럼의 주제를 지속 가능한 선거, 더 나은 미래로 가는 길로 정하고 두 개의 세션으로 진행하고자 합니다. 첫 번째 세션은 선거관리 신뢰 확보를 위한 지속 가능한 국민 참여 방안입니다. 자유롭고 공정한 선거를 통해 국민 대다수의 의사가 정치 의사결정에 제대로 반영되도록 하는 것은 민주주의에 있어서 가장 핵심적인 요소입니다. 그러나 최근 대한민국을 비롯하여 세계 각국에서 선거관리에 대한 신뢰가 위협받고 있는 상황입니다. 선거관리기관이나 선거 과정에 대한 근거 없는 의혹이나 음모론이 인터넷이나 소셜 네트워크 서비스를 통해 급격하게 확산되기도 합니다. 의혹은 더욱 부풀려지고 과장되어서 결국은 선거 결과에 대한 불신에까지 이어질 수 있습니다. 이러한 극한 대립의 상황에서 선거관리의 신뢰를 회복하고 지속 가능한 민주주의를 유지하기 위해서 우리는 무엇을 해야 하는지를 함께 고민했으면 합니다. 또한 국민의 높아진 정치 참여 욕구를 긍정적이고 발전적인 방향으로 선거에 반영할 수 있는 방안이 무엇인지에 대해서도 함께 지혜를 모으고자 합니다. 두 번째 세션은 선거 홍보물 유권자의 권리와 환경 보호를 위한 과제입니다. 우리는 기후변화와 환경오염에 대한 문제가 국제적인 화두가 되는 시대에 살고 있습니다. 선거 홍보물이 유권자의 알 권리와 후보자 선택권을 보장하는 중요한 수단이기도 하지만 대규모 선거 폐기물로 인한 환경오염을 유발하고 있다는 우려의 목소리도 분명히 있습니다. 이 두 가지의 가치를 조화롭게 지켜낼 수 있도록 선거 홍보물에 관한 다양한 방안이 제시되기를 희망합니다. 끝으로 오늘 논의를 위하여 바쁘신 와중에 시간을 내어주신 사회자 및 발제자 여러분, 국제기구 및 각국의 선거 전문가 청중 여러분께 다시 한번 감사 인사를 드립니다. 오늘 포럼에서 글로벌 동반자 관계를 함께 만들고 발전시켜 나아갈 수 있기를 바라며 이번 포럼이 선거 민주주의의 보다 밝은 미래를 향한 우리의 여정의 의미 깊은 행사가 되기를 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
I hope that the chairperson's remarks were well delivered to you. Now let me introduce the special guest for making congratulatory remarks today, the Danish ambassador to Korea, Sven Alling. He is an experienced diplomat with a strong focus on sustainable development, climate action, and finance. Before coming to Korea, he previously served in the embassies in Washington, D.C. and Berlin, and also as the Danish ambassador in Dhaka, Bangladesh, Ankara, Turkey, and Cairo, Egypt. Let's meet him on the screen.
카이로에서도 활동하셨습니다. 여러분 안녕하십니까? 오늘 이 자리에 덴마크를 대표해서 지속 가능한 선거를 주제로 하는 이 포럼에 참여하게 되어서 영광입니다. 서울 국제선거 포럼이 국제협력을 촉진해서 전 세계적으로 더 공정하고 포용적이고 더 지속 가능한 선거를 만들기 위해 노력해 오신 것에 대해 찬사를 드립니다. 또한 한국중앙선거관리위원회 측에서 저에게 축사 기회를 주신 것에 대해서도 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 여러분께서 덴마크를 민주주의, 시민 참여 그리고 지속 가능성 측면에서 선진 국가로 여기신다는 점에 대해 저는 굉장한 자부심을 느낍니다. 민주주의는 자유공정사회의 핵심입니다. 민주주의는 국민에게 투표권을 보장함으로써 국민의 의견을 존중하고 반영하고 있습니다. 국민이 선출한 리더들의 행동과 부적절한 행위에 대해 책임을 지도록 하고 있죠. 민주주의는 안전하고 평화로운 사회의 기반이기도 합니다. 모두가 사회 경제적 지위에 상관없이 법 앞에서 평등하기 때문입니다. 오늘날 모든 사람들의 목소리를 직접적으로 일일이 반영하는 것은 힘듭니다. 그렇기 때문에 우리가 대표를 선출해서 우리를 대신해서 목소리를 내도록 하는 것이죠. 이것이 견고하고 또 신뢰할 수 있는 제도로 정착화되어야 하고 그렇게 하는 것이 중요할 뿐이 아니라 반드시 필요한 일이라고 할 수 있습니다. 또한 지속적으로 투명성과 신뢰성을 보장하려면 언론의 자유와 독립성이 보장되어야 합니다. 솔직하면서도 비평적인 언론이 필요하고 시민사회는 민주주의 거버넌스에 참여해야 합니다. 선거 결과가 조작될 수 없고 정부는 국민의 뜻에 따라 변화해야 한다는 사실을 우리가 믿을 수 있어야 합니다. 법원의 독립성이 확보되어야 하고 의회는 정부를 지속적으로 견제할 수 있어야 합니다. 이렇게 제도를 보호하지 않는다면 공정한 공정하고 포용적인 사회, 그러한 우리가 자부심을 가지고 있는 사회를 위험에 빠뜨릴 수 있기 때문입니다. 그렇게 되면 민주주의가 허울 뿐인 껍데기만 남게 되는 것이죠. 일부 민주주의 국가에서는 불평등이 악화되고 있습니다. 빈곤하고 소외된 국민들이 선거 참여율이 떨어지고 있는 것이죠. 이들은 자신이 투표를 해도 자신에게 이로운 변화가 벌어지지 않을 것이다라고 생각하기 때문입니다. 다시 말하면 민주주의에 대해서 신뢰를 잃은 것이죠. 우리 모두 열심히 노력해서 소외계층의 대표성이 향상되도록 해야 합니다. 덴마크에서는 민주주의를 구축해서 권력이 남용되지 않도록 하고 있습니다. 다양한 정당들 간의 대화의 장을 잘 마련해오고 있기도 합니다. 그와 동시에 우리는 권한을 가진 정치인들에게 책임을 묻고 필요할 때는 우리가 불만족스러운 점을 표현하는 것을 두려워하지 않습니다. 오늘 전문가 여러분들의 고견을 듣기를 기대하고 있습니다. 이 주제로 첫 번째 세션에서 하시는 말씀을 잘 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 우리가 서로의 경험으로부터 배우고 어떻게 하면 선거의 신뢰성을 개선하고 국민 참여를 증진할 수 있는지 배울 수 있기를 기대합니다. 한국 중앙선거관리위원회가 이번에 선거가 환경에 미치는 영향을 포럼 주제에 포함하셨는데요. 또 찬사의 말씀을 드리고 싶습니다. 민주주의 가치뿐만이 아니라 환경을 염두에 두고 지속가능한 선거를 만드는 것이 중요하기 때문입니다. 선거 홍보물은 유권자들에게 후보의 정책에 대해 쉽게 알릴 수 있는 방법인데요. 선거 현수막이나 벽보, 전단지들이 정말로 우리 지구를 희생시키면서 제작할 정당성이 있는가? 이런 질문을 해봐야 합니다. 데이터에 따르면 한 개의 선거 포스터가 CO2를 1.4kg을 배출한다고 합니다. 자동차로 10km를 주행할 때 배출되는 이산화탄소의 양에 해당합니다. 이렇게 탄소를 배출할 만큼의 가치가 있는가? 그런 공보물들이 유권자들에게 얼마나 도움이 되는가 질문을 해야 하고 그 질문에 대한 해답을 찾기 위해서 대화를 해야 합니다. 선거 포스터를 재활용 소재로 만들 수도 있고요. 더 좋은 방법으로 친환경적인 방법으로 시민들에게 정보를 전달할 수 있습니다. 그런 면에서 두 번째 세션에서 전문가분들이 나누는 대화를 주의 깊게 들어보려고 합니다. 다시 한번 저를 초청해 주셔서 감사드리고 매년 이렇게 포럼을 성공적으로 진행하신 것에 대해 축하의 말씀을 드립니다. 더 공정하고 더 나은 민주주의를 만들려면 협력이 중요합니다. 모두 유익한 포럼이 되시기를 좋은 결실을 맺으시기를 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
It was such an inspiring message gracing our forum. Now we will have congratulatory remarks from the Secretary General of the Association of World Election Bodies, AWEB. Dr. In-sik Chang was appointed Secretary General at the General Assembly meeting of AWEB in 2022. Before he joined the organization, he served as a Chief of Staff at the Secretariat of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea. Let's meet him in the video as well.
만나보시겠습니다. 안녕하십니까? 내외기빈 여러분, 참석자 여러분.
I am 인식창.
세계선거기관협의회 AWEB의 사무총장 장인식입니다. 오늘 뜻깊은 행사에 함께할 수 있게 되어 영광입니다. 먼저 진심으로 중앙선거관리위원회에 감사드립니다.
Commission of the Republic of Korea for the kind invitation
오늘
to attend
2023 서울 국제선거 포럼에 초대해 주셔서 진심으로 감사드립니다.
This year's forum is 9.
올해로 제9회를 맞는 서울 국제선거 포럼이 매우 뜻깊은 결실을 맺으리라 생각합니다. 특별히 감사드리고 싶은 분들이 많습니다. 오늘 소중한 의견을 공유해 주실 훌륭한 발제자 분들께 진심으로 감사드립니다. 내외교인 여러분, 오늘날 많은 전문가들은 민주주의가 위기에 직면해 있다고 경고하고 있습니다. 전 세계 여러 곳에서 우리는 정치적 세력이 사회 갈등을 해결하지 않으려 하는 모습을 목도하고 있습니다. 이런 세력은 오히려 새로운 갈등을 불러일으켜 권력을
which
움켜쥐려
is
하고
deepening the crisis.
민주주의가 직면한 위기를 악화시키고 있습니다.
As a result, new
그 결과
authoritarianism
새로운 권위주의가
is
고개를 들고
emerging in
있고
one place, and the populism,
포퓰리즘이 나타나
in another
민주적인 의사결정 제도를
which is
약화시키고
weakening a
있습니다.
democratic decision-making system. I firmly believe that
저는
we can keep
우리가
political
정치
forces
세력을
in check
견제하고
and
민주주의가 직면한 위기를
the crisis
성숙한
facing a
의식과
democracy
민주적인 시민 참여로 극복할 수 있다고 생각합니다.
and democratic civic participation and mature
그리고
citizens
성숙한 시민의 민주주의적 참여는
can be
선거를
realized
통해서
through election.
실현될 수 있습니다.
In this regard,
그런
it is
점에서
very timely to select
국민 참여를 통한 지속 가능한 선거라는 이번 포럼의 주제는
through public participation
매우
and the
시의적절하다고
voters'
할 수
right to
있습니다.
know as the name of the forum. Today we will have
오늘
in-depth
포럼에서는
discussion
시민의 선거 참여를 강화하는 방안을
citizens'
선거 관리에 대한
electoral
신뢰 확보와
participation by
변화하는
ensuring
환경 속에서
their
시민의
trust
알
in
권리를
election
보장하는
management.
방안을 통해 심도 있게
and how
살펴보게
to
됩니다.
guarantee citizens' right to know on the changing environments. I sincerely hope that
아무쪼록
this forum will be
오늘
our first
포럼이
step to leading our
위기
electoral
속의
democracy
선거
in
민주주의를
crisis in the right
올바른
direction.
방향으로 이끌 수 있는 첫걸음이
Thank you for
되기를
your
바랍니다.
attention.
감사합니다.
Thank all the speakers. Now the 2023 Seoul International Forum on Elections is open. We will now start our first session entitled Public Participation, a Sustainable Approach to Ensure Election Management Trust. Elections are a basis for democratic governance, but at the same time, malpractice and flaws can serve as a risk. As one of the sustainable approaches to improving trust, the speakers will share their ideas on how public participation, including domestic monitoring of civic organizations, political parties, and media, can contribute to elections. The Electoral Integrity Project, the EIP, presented election observation of the citizens as a more sustainable approach than the international one, which can prevent election fraud and strengthen the democratic political system. In Korea, too, civic groups and the general public showed a lot of interest in participating in the voting and counting process to make sure that the elections are conducted fairly and transparently. Now, I will hand it over to our session 1 moderator, who will open the session and introduce the presenters. The first session moderator is Professor Chang Hoon from the Department of Political Science and International Relations at 중앙 University. He gained his PhD and master's degree in political science, respectively from Northwestern University and Seoul National University. Please welcome him with a round of applause.
안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon, everyone. As introduced, I'm Chang Hoon from 중앙 University. First of all, I'd like to thank the National Election Committee for inviting me as a moderator for the first session. Let me go straight into presentations. But before doing that, let me tell you the time schedule. We are going to spend the next 1 hour and 15 minutes on the first session. We have 3 speakers in this session: Professor Sharon Lin, Professor Hyun-Chul Lee, and Professor Carla Lewis. 2 of the professors are from another country. They will join us virtually, and Professor Hyun-Chul Lee is here in this room with us. So I'm going to give each speaker 18 minutes to 20 minutes. Once we hear all from the 3 speakers, we will take questions from the online audience. And we will give the 3 presenters a chance to answer the questions for about 15 minutes.
Let me invite the first speaker, Professor Sharon Lin. She is Associate Professor of Political Science at Wayne State University in the U.S. She also served as the Vice Principal of the Graduate School of Wayne State University. She produced a lot of articles and papers related to the politics in the Latin America region. She's an expert in this area.
연결되어 있으신가요? 그러면 쉐런 린
So
교수님의
if we have her
발표를
on
듣도록
Zoom,
하겠습니다.
let us listen to her presentation.
Hello, thank you so much to the National Election Commission for the invitation to participate in this prestigious forum today. And it is an honor to be here with all of you and with the other distinguished speakers on the panel. So I'm going to speak today on the value of domestic election monitoring for ensuring and improving trust in elections, based on lessons that I have learned over the years in my research on how civic domestic election monitors work in Latin America. So when we think about how public participation works in elections, we often think of a citizen's responsibility to cast their vote or the role citizens may play as poll workers or as candidates for office. But in this presentation, I want to highlight another means. So what is domestic election monitoring? So domestic election monitoring refers to the nonpartisan civic election monitoring or observation of elections by citizen organizations operating in their home country. And this term distinguishes domestic election monitoring both from international election monitoring efforts from groups such as the United Nations, European Union, or Organization of American States. And it also distinguishes, the nonpartisan term distinguishes these types of efforts from other domestic citizen efforts that might be partisan, such as the role of party poll watchers and challengers in an election. And so it's worth saying another word about that. You know, party poll watchers are trained and they're at polling sites looking for activity that could perhaps undermine their candidate or their party. But domestic election monitors do not get involved, even if they see something that is going wrong in an election. They're trained to understand the election process and report on whether procedures have been followed. But they don't act in general at polling sites, they report. And they are really serving as sort of third-party monitors who have the natural interest of citizens in an election. So as you can imagine, just as the literature now talks about international election observers that are not credible, not genuine, biased, partisan, they're sometimes called zombie monitors when they're international monitors. Domestic election monitors, the groups that I'm talking about today, I'm talking about the credible, professional, and truly nonpartisan groups. You can tell these groups because they follow global best practices and they adhere to a common declaration of principles and a code of conduct that has been established among groups that do this type of work all around the world. And they also work in accord with the most prominent and credible international election observers on these matters. So domestic election monitoring has become a truly global practice since the late 1980s, when the first group to try domestic election observation started in the Philippines. More than 250 organizations in over 90 countries or territories around the world have organized nonpartisan domestic observation of their elections. And Latin American countries have some of the longest and deepest experience with domestic election observation. From 1988 to 2022, organizations in 19 states in the region have monitored hundreds of elections and referenda, participating in more than half of all national level election processes in the region. And you can see on the map, any country that's in any shade of green has had an experience with domestic election observation.
There's really very few major countries in the region that have not. Costa Rica and Uruguay, both of which are the more renowned democracies in the region, have not had monitors yet. Cuba, which is known as the least democratic country in the region, also has not had domestic election observation. But the rest of the region has sometimes a very long experience. The countries in the darker shade of green in this map are those that are more recent to have domestic monitors. Brazil is the most recent of these. So what do domestic election monitors do in elections? So they observe the polling process and assess the quality of the polling process by visiting polling sites on election day, often with surveys that they'll systematically conduct at different places around the country. They conduct parallel vote tabulations. This works in places where the initial vote count is calculated at the polling site or at a regional site. So domestic election observers will take a sample of sites that's representative of the country, go and get the election results from those sites, note them down so that they can project the result and see indeed and confirm that it hasn't been manipulated from the time the vote was cast at a polling site to the time it was counted at the national level. So parallel vote tabulations, also known as quick counts, have been one of the most important tools that domestic monitors have used in Latin America. Some groups monitor the voter registration process to make sure that voters who are eligible are permitted correctly to register to vote, or they have done very important audits of the voter rolls to make sure that the voter rolls are accurate and don't reflect names of voters that should not be voting in a region or include all of the voters that are eligible to vote at the same time. Domestic election monitors may monitor for bias in media coverage throughout the campaign period or at particular times to see if coverage is biased in favor of particular parties or candidates, if coverage is biased in favor of particular types of candidates, often monitoring for gender bias in campaign and media coverage has been introduced as a new form of, a new type of concern that domestic monitors take on. They monitor campaign spending and in particular, the use of state resources by campaigns or candidates that violates the election law. They monitor gender equity throughout the election. They monitor for disability inclusion. And recently, many groups have started to try to crowdsource data on election irregularities and produce real-time maps so that the domestic election monitors can share with election authorities what they are hearing about where problems are flaring up during any given election day. Outside of elections, many of these groups continue to work. They lobby for election reforms. They engage in voter and civic education. They really work on a variety of different activities that can contribute to people's knowledge of the proper election procedure and to trust overall in elections. They have many sustainability benefits. Some of them are often cited as was mentioned at the beginning of the session from the Election Integrity Project. The benefits of domestic election observers making them more sustainable than international election observers is that civic organizations can deploy much larger numbers of observers at a much lower cost relative to international organizations, which would have to bring people into the country from outside to be present on election day. Domestic observers are on the ground and they can observe the whole election process from the minute the campaign starts or voter registration begins through the end and certification of results, whereas international observers are often on the ground for a few weeks before and after the election at best. Domestic observers generally have fewer language barriers and greater cultural competency than international observers. But the last point is what I think is the most important. which is that the act for citizens of participating in a domestic election observation creates a pool of citizens who really learn in great detail about proper election procedure. They are present with poll workers throughout the day. They see how hard it is to run an election and how many challenges. They witness political party observers and citizens and poll workers working together today through the day of the election, even if they might be on different sides of the political spectrum, and they see sort of the work of how democracy is made. And that sort of experience is quite formative, and it transforms the way that individual may think about the election. That individual may share that with their friends, with their families. You end up with a pool of citizens who are committed to free and fair elections and have some good experience in it. Indeed, in Latin America, many of the individuals who worked in the early years of domestic election monitoring in their countries, as those countries were democratizing and grew into leadership roles in these domestic monitoring organizations, were later asked to become the election authorities because they had experience and knowledge of proper election procedure and a demonstrated commitment to running free and fair elections. So it became a very important human resources pool. So I want to tell you a little bit about a couple of cases in Latin America, just to give you a flavor for what it is that monitors can do. So in Guyana, a group called the Electoral Assistance Bureau was founded in the early 1990s. Guyana had been trying to hold elections for several years after 1988 and was struggling to get them organized and set to go. So this group came together of citizens, volunteers, and they decided that the most important thing they could do was do an audit of the voter registry. They were very concerned that all of the people eligible to vote did not have a means of voting because they weren't properly registered. And that EAB audit encouraged the election authorities to create a new register, and it dramatically diminished the number of inaccuracies in that register and made for a better, fairer, and freer election in which full participation could be made. So I want to show you just a little bit of data, and I'll show this. You'll see these maps again and again. They're generated with data from the Clean Elections Index that's generated by the Varieties of Democracy Project. And that index is a compilation of a variety of indicators of clean elections ranked by expert coders. So here's Guyana. You can see it, it's circled, small country on the northern coast of South America in 1988. Before that 1992 election, you can see that the elections were not considered clean by any stretch. And then after EAB began to monitor, and with the changes that took place in 1997, elections weren't perfect, but they had improved. So domestic monitors were part of that improvement, not the only causal reason. So Mexico. In Mexico in 1991, a group of organizations started to monitor state and local elections, and they did this in the wake of a presidential election in 1988 that many believed had been stolen. So in 1991, groups started to monitor, civic groups started to monitor state and local elections, and by 1994, when the next presidential election was held, they were able to mobilize almost 40,000 observers across the country. And in that observation, they were able to document that in a quarter of rural precincts, voters were being coerced to vote in favor of the party that had ruled Mexico for nearly 70 years at that time. Alianza Cívica went on to become an advocate for election reform in Mexico and observed multiple elections after that time, including the 2000 election when there was a transition of power from the long ruling party. And so you can just see in 91, when they got started, Mexico was in the pink. By 97, which was the midterm election after the 1994 election, it was improving. And in 2000, the elections were considered very clean. In Peru, in 1992, then President Fujimori engaged in a self-coup, dismissed Congress, and created a lot of concerns about the health of Peruvian democracy. Transparencia Peru is a domestic monitoring group created in 1995 to observe elections. They observed elections in 1995. By 2000, there were serious concerns about fraud in elections. And in the first round of the presidential election, the process was so flawed that Transparencia refused to observe the second round. They didn't want to give it any credibility by being there as observers. And the international observers followed suit and also refused to observe. So ultimately, new elections were called the following year, and those were much improved. Transparencia is one of the leading groups in the region in Latin America that does election observation. You can see in 2000 and in 2001 the improvement. And then in 2021, Peru is considered to be holding some of the cleaner elections in the region. So the last case I want to tell you about is Colombia. Misión de Observación Electoral was founded in 2006. It's one of the more recent domestic election monitoring groups, and it's really been an innovative group. So I'm showing you a map of their crowdsourced data on election irregularities from the 2022 presidential election. And so this is a crowdsourced app that MOE created for citizens to report concerns. And in real time, those concerns would show sort of where the hot spots were, which departments of the country were experiencing more problems with elections. They shared this data as it came in with election authorities so that election authorities could follow up and act. And another thing MOE did in 2022 was monitor conditions for gender equity in the election. They published a report on that and have been pursuing greater equity and more opportunities for women as voters, as candidates, and in office. And so you can see here's Colombia in 2006 when MOE began, in 2022 improving. So you might have noticed looking at these maps, at these more recent maps, that there's two countries in the region that are not doing well in the Clean Elections Index. This is Nicaragua and Venezuela. So in both of these places, there are domestic election monitoring groups that have been working for a long time, but their work has gotten increasingly harder and harder. And so I want to take a few moments at the end of this talk to talk to you about what enables domestic election monitors so that they can make those sustainable contributions that we are talking about. So the first is an established legal framework. Domestic election monitoring organizations benefit from election laws that specify a formal role for citizen observers, nonpartisan citizen observers in the election process. If you look at these laws in the Americas, legal frameworks for domestic election monitors vary greatly. Some are very permissive, some are restrictive, others non-existent, no particular mention. And the ways that these frameworks can be manipulated can include the creation of slow or cumbersome accreditation processes for observers, restrictions on access for domestic election observers, restrictions on funding, how they can be funded, restrictions in the way that they can carry out their task. So an established legal framework that really clearly lays out a role for election observers who are citizens is very helpful. Those frameworks have been manipulated and changed and narrowed in recent years in both Nicaragua and Venezuela, the two cases I just mentioned. You might be interested to know that in the US, we do not have a national framework that allows for nonpartisan domestic election observation. These rules, because we have a federal system, vary greatly by state. So the darker shaded states in the olive green here are those states that do allow explicitly nonpartisan election observers. But even within that set, the specific rules may vary a great deal. The other thing that I think really helps foster conditions for good nonpartisan citizen election observation is a fully autonomous election authority. At least in Latin America, this has proven to be important. The autonomy of the election management body has an impact on whether civic associations are able to participate as domestic election monitors. So you can see in this chart that I provided for you, the domestic monitoring organizations are in the blue, and the smallest percentage of domestic monitoring experiences takes place when the election management body is not autonomous. It doesn't act as an autonomous agent or independent entity, independent from other ministries or branches of the government. You can see that as the election management body becomes more autonomous, you see more occasions or more occurrences. More of the domestic monitoring missions are concentrated in these places, in these spaces. And then interestingly, the other two lines that you're seeing here, the green and the tan, represent two different types of international election monitoring missions. And so what you see over here is that, and that you can note, even when an election management body is fully autonomous, there's still a substantial percentage of the overall number of domestic monitoring missions that take place. And what that tells me is that domestic election monitors and capable election management bodies are fully compatible. They should be collaborative. They should be complementary. So I'd like to conclude just by saying that domestic election monitoring by citizens in their own country, whether or not it is regulated in election law, is rightly considered an exercise of democratic rights. It is a way that citizens can exercise their right to free and fair elections, the right to participate in public affairs, and exercise the right to information about how the election is taking place. An established legal framework that is permissive and a fully autonomous election management body. From my research in Latin America, these two elements seem consistently to support the development of domestic election monitoring experiences that can contribute in a sustainable way to improving trust in elections. And so I'll stop here and look forward to questions and look forward to hearing from my other colleagues on the panel.
네,
Thank you.
린 교수님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your
중남미 여러
presentation.
국가들의
She made a
선거
presentation
모니터링에
focusing
관한
on the
아주
case
구체적인
examples of
사례들,
domestic election monitoring in Latin American countries. And from the perspective of sustainable election management, she mentioned 4 very important points.
The next speaker is Professor.
미스커뮤니케이션이 있었던 것 같습니다. 각 발제자의 발제 시간은
Me
처음에 제가
and
말씀드린
the
20분.
organizer of the forum. We are going to give, let me correct myself, we are going to give 15 minutes to each speaker. Today's topic is fairness in elections, so I'd like to apologize to Hyun-Chul Lee and Dr. Carla Lewis because I have to give you only 15 minutes. Now let me turn to Professor Hyun-Chul Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hyun-Chul Lee. I'm from the Department of Political Science at Konkuk University. Professor Sharon Lin told us about cases in Latin America. Thank you so much for your valuable insight. And I'd like to thank all the people who are here with us today, who are also making great contribution to improve democracy in the world. Today I'm going to talk about public participation for a sustainable approach to ensure election management trust. I'm going to focus on cases in Korea in this presentation. As you may well know, Elections play a great role in representative democracy. I think you are very well aware of the role. Elections give you, especially voters, an opportunity to exert sovereignty. And elections are conducted on a regular basis. You can express your opinions and your voices, and you can hold existing power accountable. And the elected power is given legitimacy, and it also has an opportunity to resolve political conflicts. So elections can be used to pursue social solidarity and integration. There are some conditions for the representative democracy to be conducted as it is supposed to be. And this is also in line with the original purposes of elections. We have to think about, in that regard, quality of elections. If quality of elections is undermined, people will question the legitimacy of elections. In order to expand and establish transparent election systems, we have many organizations around the world working hard, including Kofi Annan Foundation. There are some factors that affect the quality of democratic elections. First of all, we can look at the factors from a structural perspective. There could be social conflicts and divisions that cause that cause some problems in our society, and that would have negative impact on quality of elections. This problem often occurs in underdeveloped countries. We can also take a look at an institutional perspective. If a country has check and balance through separation of powers, we can expect positive impact on quality of democratic elections. The last perspective is actors' perspective. Excessive election competition can cause mistrust in the process of elections. Some people might question fairness in election process. I think this happens often in Korea. This has a negative impact on quality of elections. Let's take a look at Korea. In 1987, Korea experienced democratization. Since then, there have been many efforts, especially reform of our institutions, to improve democratic elections. Especially, let me focus on the Act on Election of Public Officials that was enacted in 1994. That expanded freedom of campaign and public campaign financing system. In 1997, election law was amended. Many people pointed out some elections cost too much money. Especially, we had this problem called high-cost political structure. This was a motivation for expansion of the public campaign financing system, and many people work hard to improve fairness in election campaign. In that process, TV and media were often used so that more candidates have a chance to run for elected offices in a more transparent and fairer way. In 2004, Political Relations Act was amended as well. And under the act, people worked to stay away from too expensive elections. And preliminary candidates and normal candidates, they should be treated the same in a fair way. And bribery was strictly prohibited. And if voters are involved in bribery, they were strictly punished under the act. And there was another act or efforts to share more personal information with candidates so that we can have a better election systems. There have been many efforts for democratic elections, including efforts to improve procedural controversy after democratization. But today, we have to focus on political polarization because that could worsen fair elections. And this caused new challenges for democratic elections. As a result, some candidates haven't accepted results of elections. And some candidates could possibly deny democratic legitimacy. And as I said earlier, the role of elections was to improve social solidarity and integration. But instead, because of these flaws and problems, social conflicts are worsened. Today we are talking about election quality project. It's about the importance of citizens' participation in electoral process. I think this is the future of our democratic elections. International organizations, as Professor said in her presentation, international organizations and international monitors are less important than domestic monitors. In that sense, civic organizations in Korea have actively participated in democratic election process. For example, in 1991, Civic Coalition for Fair Election was established. It is a standing organization to monitor elections. In the 2000, civic organizations formed alliance nationwide, and they discredited questionable candidates so that those candidates are not elected. In 2002, we had alliance of voters in presidential election. This is another civic organization. It was formed to improve fairness in democratic elections. In 2006, civic organizations conducted manifesto policy voting campaign. Political promises were under strict scrutiny by these organizations. As you can see here, civic organizations in Korea have illegal powers in check. They kept illegal power in check. And civic organizations have also conducted their activities for the benefit of democratic elections. As you have heard, we have introduced various systems of public participations in every corner of our society. Local governments and central governments have introduced resident participation body system or referendum systems so that residents' voices are heard and their opinions are provided in the process of representative democracy. And judicial branch also introduced jury system under which the public can participate in decision-making process. Regarding political parties, nomination system and primary election systems have been reformed that allowed more citizens to participate in this process.
As such, in many domains, 오늘날 의혹이 제기되고 있는 주요한 사안들, 특히 오늘날 우리 한국에서는 투표지 분류기의 문제랄지 there have been issues related to ballot sorting machine, and there have been issues raised regarding the fairness in the election, and also there have been issues raised regarding managing the ballots and ballot boxes. The public had a lot of doubts and suspicions about these issues, and we need to address those issues through the public participation in the election process. As you know very well, there are major issues that have recently been raised regarding our election process. It means that though these issues have significant impact on the credibility, representation, and fairness and professionalism of elections. That's why, in order to address these issues, we need to make a good use of the citizens' participation in the election process. So far, many experts discussed how to engage the public more in the election process. I would like to share with you the proposals from the experts. The first idea is to create an expert observation group. For example, political parties, political academic associations, or the media could recommend experts to participate in the expert observation group so that those expert observers will dispel or clarify any suspicious issues raised by the public regarding the election process. In this case, compared to ordinary citizens, experts could give higher efficiency in clarifying or dispelling any suspicions in the issues related to election process. And another idea is to have a public observer group. Academic societies and other groups, including the citizens groups, could publicly recruit the observers and those who are going to monitor the election process. And members of the citizen observers could monitor the advanced voting process and the ballot counting process as well. But in this case, it will cost some money and time. We have 17 cities and provinces in Korea. Each of the cities and provinces could consider running a public observation group for election process. Another idea is to create a security expert group. Security expert group will focus on technical aspects of elections. Not only the citizens monitoring, but also the digital aspects are very important because there are a lot of digital fake news. There are many types of election crimes in the era of digitalization. So how are we going to control the fake news dissemination, and how are we going to control those who manipulate online comments for certain election campaigns? And we need to nurture election staff, people who are in charge of administrative affairs in elections. So far, Korea has remained a country with the election best practice, but if we just follow the model driven by the public sector, by public institutions, that we cannot achieve true success. So we need to establish a K-election governance model that combines the government-driven model and the citizens' participation model. And in order to ensure stable supply of the election staff, we need to make a good use of the incumbent and former public servants, students, and general citizens. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. As a very professional professor in this area, he mentioned critical points, and thank you for the meaningful proposals as well.
Now let me introduce you the third speaker of the session, Dr. Carla Lewis.
Dr. Lewis. You are in.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Hello.
Go
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it is a great pleasure to be here today in this forum. I had the pleasure to be present in the opening assembly of the AWEB in 2013 in presence in South Korea, in Seoul. So let me congratulate you again for this great initiative. It is a pity that I'm not there in presence, but fortunately we have technology to help us go through this. So first of all, this session has been filled with great speakers. And I'm going to add a few points on the topic of sustainable approach to ensure trust in electoral management through public participation. So I'm going to share with you some of my knowledge in the hope that it can be helpful. As mentioned, I work at the University of Coimbra in Portugal, and I also teach in law. So and I've also been working as a practitioner, and I've been recently with the Carter Center in the electoral process in Brazil. And I think that the electoral process in Brazil is paradigmatic of many things, and also on how the electoral management, in this case, the Superior Electoral Tribunal, managed to build trust in a time when this was so disputed, when this was so essential for democracy, and how the Electoral Tribunal managed to do this. And I think this is paramount and could be seen as a great example and as a very interesting case study. So let me go back to the start. So when we talk about democracy, we talk about international standards. And for some of these, we don't need to go very far, as they are already in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we are really talking about human rights, about basic human rights. And we have here everyone has the right to take part in the government of their country, directly or through freely chosen representatives. And then number 3 has the basis of what an election should be: the will of the people, periodic elections, universal and equal suffrage, secret ballots or equivalent. And here in the equal suffrage, we have already, for instance, the equality of men and women and the right to participation. And as the previous intervention mentioned, we can also have participation not just in the voting process, but also through domestic monitors, through election monitors and other forms of that stakeholders can take to take part in the electoral process. And of course, if we allow stakeholders to participate, for instance, women's organizations, and women are often underrepresented in elections, this will also create a sense of belonging and a sense of engagement with the process. And also we have here other fundamental freedoms that are not specific only to elections, but also relate to elections. The freedom of opinion and expression, the freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association. And for instance, freedom of association can allow, for instance, the forming of public groups of electoral monitoring. It can also, of course, when we're talking about freedom of expression and freedom of opinion, we can be talking about the media. And it is also a good idea for the electoral management body and the electoral authorities to engage with these organizations. And of course, the freedom of movement, the right to access to polling stations and to all facilities where electoral acts take part or any preparations for elections, because this will also increase the transparency and the trust in the process. And of course, the freedom from discrimination, that everybody should be treated equally, and the right to an effective legal remedy, that everybody can have access to the law if they feel that their rights were not guaranteed. So we have here some basic requirements for elections. They are in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we have here fundamental freedoms that are also connected to elections. And when we're talking about elections, and here I'm going through this slide that I really like, this graphic image, which is the electoral cycle approach. This tool was developed by International IDEA, and it shows the different stages that an election comprises. And of course, when we're talking about these groups, and I'm going to talk a bit more about this, about electoral stakeholders and who they can be present and should be present probably from the beginning of the electoral cycle. And if you look at this graphic, we can see that the electoral cycle starts here with the legal framework. So it is also perhaps a good idea to hear these groups and to see what they have to say and which inputs they can bring. I remember while I served as a board member of the Portuguese Electoral Commission that we had to develop a tool for people with visual impairments. And for us, it was crucial to hear the associations of people with disabilities, because they were the ones using the equipment. They were the ones that had this visual impairment, and they were the ones knowing better what would suit their needs. Of course, they were heard and the process followed, but it was very important to gather feedbacks. It's the same, for instance, if we're talking about youth. And when we talk about youth, often they have very low rates of participation. But youth, of course, is the future of the country. So it's good, and I also coordinated a campaign aimed at young voters or prospective voters. And it was great to have their feedback and their participation. So we can extend this participation of electoral stakeholders through the different stages of the process. The planning and implementation, knowing where they're going to be, where party representatives, domestic monitors, civil society organizations, if they have a place in the polling station, what can they see from the counting? And of course, this will be a process that feeds itself and that can help reinforce and build trust in the electoral process. And we have here, of course, training and education, electoral campaign, voting operation, and of course, very important, verification of results. And after the election takes place, to see what was well and what can be improved. And so I would like to call this idea of having participation throughout the electoral cycle. So now that we've seen the stages of the election at large, it is important also to recall who are the electoral stakeholders. So when we talk about elections, they do not exist in the void. They have a purpose, and which is, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to ascertain the will of the people. And the people is composed by many different people, and by many different stakeholders. And an election can also have a great impact on many stakeholders. If we think, for instance, of people with disabilities, for them, it's crucial to be able to vote. If we think about the youth, about young movements, for them, it's very important to feel that their voice was heard. If we think about women, often they are an underrepresented group of society. So it is very important for them to feel that they were heard and they were taken into account. And the same goes for groups, for political parties, big or small political parties, to know that they had the chance and they had an opportunity in the elections. And of course, in these groups of stakeholders, each of them, they have specific needs, but they also have different things that they can bring into the electoral process. And I would like to highlight this idea that it is very important to have stakeholders into account, because they can also bring their inputs and help make the electoral process better. And of course, each institution that operates in the electoral process should be inclusive, accessible, and fair. And to think about the different stakeholders, I often propose a map when I'm dealing with this, when I'm giving training on these issues, and I've done training for many electoral officials, to think of who are the stakeholders, what do they need, how can we address this, how can we have a smoother relation with the electoral stakeholders. And we have here a list of possible stakeholders, political parties, candidates, voters, but also election monitors and citizens, international observers, civil society organizations, the media, which is also very, very important. And when we talk about civil society organizations, they are multiple and diverse, and they deal with a very wide range of issues. They can help build democratic development, the empowerment of women. Sometimes they are the ones proposing and promoting legal reforms. For instance, in the case of Portugal, there was a civil society movement pushing towards a change in the voter registration system for Portuguese citizens living abroad. They can promote human rights, civic education, governance, the rights of people with disabilities. So there is great richness in these electoral stakeholders, namely in the civil society organizations. And of course, here the domestic monitoring of elections is also of great value, and this was already addressed by the previous presentation. So following these, some points that can be tackled is the regular consultation with civil society organizations, because they have crucial knowledge and expertise. For instance, organizations representing women, they have a good knowledge of what are their needs, how we can better address them. Are the opening hours of the polling stations enough for these groups? What can be done? Which campaigns can we design to address women? Are they an underrepresented group? Why is this? And for instance, the youth is the same. What can we have in a campaign to address the youth? Which social media are they using? What are their references? How can we better address them? And the same with people with disabilities. What are their needs? What can the electoral management do to address the needs of people with disabilities? Do they need a specific campaign? Do they need better access? What are the problems and the issues that they report? What are their needs? What can improve their situation? And of course, these can be partners for the EMB, the electoral management body, to discuss initiatives, to develop initiatives, and also to build trust and to help disseminate the work of the electoral management body in specific areas. So it's always good to have a positive relationship with civil society organizations, and they can be good partners to implement electoral activities. And for instance, the training of temporary electoral staff, and for instance, in Portugal, there was a surge in the needs of electoral staff, especially during the pandemic, and this happened across the world. And so it was a good idea, for instance, to engage the youth, the people in universities, the students. They had lower risk of COVID, they were willing to participate, and they served as a positive workforce. Information programs, and of course, this will also help increase electoral integrity. And so the specific initiatives to foster participation, they can be the electoral observation, domestic and international, the consultation with stakeholders on a regular basis, to have members of these stakeholders working and serving as poll workers or helping on election day, initiatives on gender equality, the engagement of youth, the elders, to see what are their needs and how we can address, among multiple others. And here, I am aware that I'm in the final minutes of my time. I would just like to bring the case of Brazil here, the very recent case, and it was very famous, and to explain why this all matters. Because elections, they are a cornerstone of democracy. And we had recently across the world with the COVID pandemic that there was the need to build trust into the electoral system. And of course, it is a good coincidence that the case of South Korea was one of the paradigmatic cases and probably the first election to be held during the pandemic. And of course, the need to build trust and to bring people into the polling stations was paramount. In Brazil, this happened for different reasons. And in this case, there was also a crisis of trust in the electoral management bodies, and the electoral tribunal, superior electoral tribunals, they worked very well and engaged very well with civil society. So they engage with public and private institutions, with civil society organizations to build trust into the system. And they did this with electoral observation. And it was also mentioned in the previous presentation that it was a very recent case for Brazil. Brazil had international and domestic electoral observation, and they partnered with these organizations. They had a sound work with them. They partnered with the media, for instance, fighting fake news or attempting to fight fake news, with institutions as the Bar Association, as the representatives of indigenous peoples. And this formed a democratic alliance that was meant to care for democracy in a time where democracy in Brazil was under such a great pressure. And I think it was paradigmatic that it was only when this need came that this alliance was formed. But luckily, and this is very important, these civil society organizations existed, they were present, and they acceded to work with the Electoral Tribunal to form this democratic alliance. So going to the conclusion, I would just like to highlight the main points of my presentation. First of all, to recall that when we're talking about elections, and there are many expressions, we're talking about the universal, a basis that is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When we talk about stakeholders, electoral stakeholders, it is always a good exercise to map them, and they can be very diverse, but they can also bring richness to the electoral process. And the electoral process is a continuum. We have here the image, the graphic representation of the electoral cycle, and we have to look at, it is very positive to look at the electoral stakeholders as peers that can bring value to the electoral cycle and increase electoral integrity. Thank you so much.
네, 칼라 루이스 박사님 감사합니다. 그러면 이제
Thank you so much for your presentation. We've heard all from the three speakers. We have about 20 minutes in this session. Now we will take questions from the audience. I and Professor Hyun-Chul Lee are here in this room, and Professor Sharon Lin and Dr. Carla Lewis. They will be with us virtually, and they will answer the questions posed to them.
그러면 이제부터 질의응답 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다.
Then we're going to share Q&A.
참가자들께서는
We have audience from online channel Zoom. Please upload your question through the chat window. We're going to choose your questions and deliver those questions to the presenters.
온라인 참석자들께서는
Our audience from online, please upload your questions.
기다리는 동안
While we are waiting for the audience to ask questions, I'm going to ask Professor Hyun-Chul Lee a
이현주
question.
교수님 오늘 발제의 맨 마지막 부분에 보면 선거
Page of your
모니터링,
presentation, you
선거
mentioned
상황,
election monitoring, and you mentioned the importance of election governance, which includes management of elections. And you mentioned that it is very important to facilitate the citizens' participation. And in order to promote citizens' participation in election process, we could propose an idea, which is to have a election staff certification system. Could you explain more details about the election staff certification system? Thank you for the question. Of course, it is very important to ensure 100% transparency in our election. But with the development of digital technologies, it has become difficult to identify the irregularities in the election process. If our citizens are not really interested in the potential issues and irregularities in the election process, then it will be very easy for us to just overlook a lot of issues. So our citizens need to change their attitude. Our citizens need to have the mindset that they are the guardians of democracy and the guardians of election process, so that we can prevent the manipulation of comments online, or we can prevent the fake news. In this regard, we could establish a system where we give certification to the qualified election observers, for example, among citizens. So citizens who received a certain education and training to become the proper observers of election process, then we could give certification to those individuals so that they can participate in the election process. Those citizens include students, and it includes retired public servants as well. So democracy has influence on our everyday life. So once people receive the certification through this process, then those individuals will have more opportunities to participate in the election process. Thank you for your comments.
We are still waiting for the online audience to ask questions, but we still haven't had one yet. As you know, Korean people are very spontaneous. They can come up with good ideas quickly. So I'm a moderator. As a moderator, I'm going to ask a question for Professor Sharon Lin.
While listening to your excellent presentation, there's one question I want to ask to Professor Lin. In your presentation, you mentioned that there are many benefits we can enjoy from the domestic election monitoring members. They have low language barrier, they have good cultural competency compared to the international election monitoring group. From the perspective of international election monitoring, for the last 20 to 30 years, we have emphasized the importance of international election monitoring, but recently, we are turning our attention to the importance of domestic election monitoring, as you mentioned in your presentation. Then, going forward, there are individuals in the international monitoring group who have deep knowledge on election monitoring and international experience. What do you think about the collaboration between domestic election monitoring group and international election monitoring group? And you have in-depth research and experience with the Latin American countries' domestic election monitoring process. Could you take an example and explain about such cooperation that happened in Latin America?
Thank you so much for the question. Something that I think is quite interesting that I have seen over many years of study of the role of domestic monitoring groups in Latin America is that at first, when domestic election monitoring groups began to monitor elections, I think many people thought that they were going to eventually take over all of the role of election observing, and that they would kind of take over for international observers. And as elections improved throughout Latin America, indeed, domestic monitoring efforts became maybe smaller, more technical. International observers, there's always a constant presence of the regional organization. The Organization of American States sends observers to almost every election that is held, but those missions became smaller. And, I think that many people felt that eventually citizen observation would become much more important and that international observation would drop away, particularly as elections improved. That looked like that was going to be the case in the mid-2000s, but then later, more election issues arose. Some of the mistrust, the fake news, the polarization that was commented on at the beginning of this program. And so I think where most organizations are right now is that they think it's quite complementary, the work of international and domestic election observers, and that domestic and international observers need to actually have a more active cooperation and collaboration with one another. I think of different examples where this has taken place and other examples where it has not. So sometimes you will have groups of international observers pronouncing an election acceptable that the domestic election observers do not find acceptable. International observers may be more interested in security and stability, whereas citizen observers of their own election may be more, maybe reflecting that diversity of needs and desires and wants that Carla Luis was mentioning. The stakeholders have many different interests in elections. And so sometimes their communications would conflict at the end of an election. So I think, the role can be complementary or it can be contentious, but I think the current trend is that international and domestic election observers are trying to work more collaboratively together. There have always been international groups that were more focused and connected to domestic civic groups, and the Carter Center is one of them in Latin America that has always sort of worked fairly closely with citizens groups on the ground. But international organizations like the Organization of American States had often maintained its distance, not wishing to involve itself in what they viewed as potentially partisan politics of the state they were visiting. So I hope that gives a little bit of an answer to your question, but I think what we will see continue to evolve are these complementary roles. And I think that election management bodies can do a great deal to promote and support citizen observation of elections in structured ways by providing accreditation or providing a training course that groups can take to make sure that citizens that want to become involved have proper training in election procedure. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and that the roles are complementary.
Thank you, Dr. Lin.
Thank you very much.
We still haven't had a question from the online audience. They don't come forward. Sometimes they are too talkative, but sometimes they are too quiet. So lastly, I'd like to ask Professor Dr. Carla Lewis a very stupid question. So here goes my question. There are people who are studying and researching electoral monitoring. The biggest interest for them is the presidential election in Turkey. The round-off election, the result of the round-off election was predictable in that election. But there are people who have no idea about what is happening in Turkey, especially the Asian audience and the rest of the world. When they watch the presidential election in that country, Turkey, they might question the independence of the judicial branch in that country. You also mentioned the importance of independence of a legislative branch. And that independence has been under threat in Turkey, and most of the media, they were in excessively favor of the current president, President Erdogan. So they were kind of biased in favor of the current president of Turkey. So, Dr. Lewis, could you tell us a little bit more about electoral monitoring in Turkey's presidential election? I'm sorry for this stupid question.
Thank you so much. And all questions are fair, and it's always interesting to have this exercise to answer. And so to start with, I think this question fits very well into the opportunities and the added benefits of electoral monitoring. And to have a spoiler already, I would just say that I'm no expert on the elections on Turkey, so I've not been following. But one thing that is really important on electoral monitoring is the awareness of the components of the electoral cycle. And I think this is already a great victory when these questions are asked. Because when we talk about and connecting this to domestic electoral observation groups, I think it's very interesting that they have a proper training on electoral observation and that they are aware of the different stages of the elections and the different roles that the electoral stakeholders can have and the electoral authorities. And for instance, I organize every year, I organize a training for prospective electoral observers. And it's very good to see the questions that people ask and that they become aware of the several components of the electoral cycle and the patterns of electoral integrity. And of course, sometimes the patterns of electoral integrity, they are not just built in the codes because someone thought they should be there. They correspond to some senses of justice, of fairness that we all have. If we have a competition, that there are equal opportunities in a race, in a competition, in our neighborhoods, in every aspect of our daily life. So I would say this also proves one of the points I was trying to build here, which is the contribution that the study and the awareness of electoral issues can bring to democracy, that domestic monitors and the people that study electoral monitoring, they can bring into democracy. And I think the first good sign is that these questions are asked, and then we look for answers and also look of what our role can be to foster electoral integrity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. 그러면 세 분의 발제자께서 저의 급조된 질문에 좋은 답변을 해주셔서 감사드리고 이것으로 그러면 1패널을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you for an informative session. We will now have a 10-minute break before starting session 2. I hope everyone enjoys the short break and look forward to having you back for our second session focused on campaign materials, a challenge for voters' right to know and environmental protection. We will be starting at 3:45 p.m. Korea Standard Time. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed your break. We will now move on to our second session entitled Campaign Materials, a Challenge for Voters' Right to Know and Environmental Protection. On one hand, campaign materials are crucial to informing citizens of candidates. On the other hand, a huge number of materials, including bulletins, banners, and posters, clutter up streets and end up in a landfill. In this sense, we hope that our second session will provide a venue where experts will present their thoughts on how to reduce election waste, but ensure voters' right to know. Now, I will hand it over to our Session 2 moderator. The moderator is Professor Yoon Soon-jin from Seoul National University Graduate School of Environmental Studies. She gained PhD in Energy and Environmental Policy and a master's degree in Urban Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Delaware. Please give her a warm welcome.
네, 안녕하세요. 방금 소개받은 서울대학교 환경대학원 윤순진입니다. 2023 국제 선거 포럼에 이렇게 세션 두 번째 세션의 사회자로 초대해 주셔서 너무나 감사드립니다.
The moderator of the second session of the Seoul International Forum on Elections. Especially the theme of the forum is Sustainable Elections Towards a Better Future. And the theme of the second session is Campaign Materials, a Challenge for Voters' Right to Know and Environmental Protection. 5 years ago, in 2018, it was actually June 7th of 2018 when I wrote a column about environment-friendly elections. That was the time immediately after we closed our election. I mentioned in the column that there are so many posters, bulletins, and banners in the street. And also, we have a lot of campaign materials delivered to our home. And there have been so many vehicles that ran on the street while due to the campaign of various candidates. There are many fixtures and equipments used for election. Also, there are many clothing used for the purpose of election campaign. And I came to have the mindset that those leftover materials of election campaigns could have harmful impact on the environment. And I learned about the case examples of other countries regarding their efforts to enable environment-friendly and sustainable elections. Especially as we are living in the age of climate crisis, we need to make a change. Especially, we need to change our culture and behaviors, and we have to change the way we operate elections. We have invited 3 presenters for the session. Each of the 3 presenters, actually, in the previous session, we didn't receive a lot of questions, but environment is something that directly affects our everyday life. Today, we invited speakers from India and Sri Lanka and from Korea. Let's have a look at what these countries are doing to enable eco-friendly elections. We can learn from them about how we can make more efforts to enable sustainable and eco-friendly elections. I would like to invite the first speaker. The first presenter is from India. It's Mr. H.R. Srinivasa, the Chief Electoral Officer of Bihar, India. If I pronounce your name incorrectly, please understand it. Mr. H.R. Srinivasa, the Chief Electoral Officer. Mr. H.R. Srinivasa is the first speaker, and we're going to listen to the first presentation. The title is Campaign Material, a Challenge for Voters' Right to Know and Environmental Protection. So I would like to ask Mr. Srinivasa to make the presentation. We can give you from 15 to 20 minutes for presentation. Mr. Srinivasa, could you please go ahead?
Madam, I'm not able to upload my presentation from here. I'm not seeing that icon, share icon.
Don't you see the share slide button?
No, madam, I'm not seeing it. If possible, can you please run the presentation?
가능하다면 혹시 한국 쪽에서 발표 자료 올려주실 수 있나요?
Mr. Srinivasa, just a minute.
Yeah, yes, madam. Can you make presentation from your side?
Yes, they are uploading your presentation material here in Korea.
Yeah, please.
Yes, you can start.
Yes, I can see that. Can I start then? Yes. Next slide, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for this slight delay. I'm Srinivasa. I'm Chief Electoral Officer of Bihar. Bihar is one of the densest populated states in the country. I'll be talking about the subject that has been given to me in three parts. In the first part, I will talk about the necessity of a political campaign and the right of the voters to know about their candidates, the political parties, their policies. And the second part, I will talk about the statutory limits imposed by the law and various judicial pronouncements. Third, what ECI has done to strike a delicate balance between the right to voters' right to know and at the same time keeping the environmental protection in mind. So first and foremost, the political campaigns are means of conveying the philosophies, the views that political party or a candidate has about the political, economic situation and the various issues that the country is facing, and what are his ideas of coming out of this situation. Next, please. Now, in order to propagate his ideas and to spread his message among the voters, the candidates, the political parties use various means for the political campaign, and one of them, and there are many methods now. Now we are in the IT age. With the advent of IT age, the political campaign obviously has also entered into the social media, television ads, etc. But in India, especially, the penetration of the internet is above 50%, and in a state like Bihar, where even now significant part of the population is less literate, so the use of brochures, flyers, posters, billboards, and other means of campaigning material is still prevalent. Next, please. So the biggest challenge is posed by the material which is often used for propagating their ideas. They in order to appeal to the voters, the candidates and political parties resort to the campaign based on material which is detrimental to the environment. Next. The materials that they use frequently are flyers, brochures, posters, flexes, which are made up of paper, plastic, ink, and other materials which are not recyclable or reusable. And the production of these materials is also not only involves cutting of the trees and also water pollution and air pollution. Many of these materials, when they are burnt, lead to the carbon emissions, which causes air pollutions, and also the pollution which takes place when they are transported over distance. The shipping also contributes for environmental pollution. Next. Disposal of these campaigning materials is particularly challenging. Many of these things cannot be recycled or disposed of. However, so the challenge before us, all the people who are involved in election management, is to ensure that these rights, the rights of the candidates and political parties to propagate their ideas, and the voters' right to know, is not compromised at any point of time. Next, please. So many of these materials are also single-use plastic, which not only they are not non-decayable. Secondly, they cannot be reused, and their burning also leads to adverse health effect on both humans as well as the environment. These materials are largely based on polyvinyl chloride. Next. So this is about the campaign material which is widely used. I basically emphasized on the material which causes environmental degradation. Now I'm coming to the various pronouncements made by the highest court of India, and also the laws which have been made in order to curb the environmental deterioration because of the campaigning materials. Now, Honorable Supreme Court of India said that it is voters' right to know. It's not only his fundamental right to exercise his vote, exercise his franchise, but also he should know information about the candidate whom he is going to elect. Therefore, voters' right to know has been interpreted as one of the fundamental rights under the Indian Constitution. Next. So ECI, in the light of Honorable Supreme Court's order, has come out with several measures to ensure that voter knows about the candidates, the political parties, the manifestos, and the policies of the candidates as well as the political parties. Most importantly, in a democratic society like India, where there are cases of large-scale large number of candidates with criminal antecedents participating in elections, the voter should know about the educational qualification, the assets and liabilities of the candidate, and also the criminal antecedents. So now the Election Commission of India has made it mandatory for all the candidates and the political parties who set up such candidates to publish why did they select such candidate, and what are the criminal antecedents, how many criminal cases are pending, is there any conviction in any of those cases. These have to be published on their website. These have to be published on the television. Now, Election Commission of India also ensures that this information reaches the voters in advance through various apps, which I'll come to in the later part of it. Next. So ECI's initiative towards environmental protection is, the basic motto is reduce, reuse, and recycle. So Election Commission of India is adhering to this policy. We reduce the use of materials which cause environmental pollution. We try to reuse the material which is used as campaigning material as to the maximum extent possible. The recycled paper is, the Election Commission of India advises the political parties and candidates to use the recycled material for campaigning as much as possible. Next. There is a National Green Tribunal which asked for banning all non-degradable materials, particularly single-use plastics. In the light of the National Green Tribunal order, the Kerala High Court banned use of flax and other materials which are based on single-use plastics. So single-use plastics in campaigning material has been banned. Next. Now, Election Commission of India has also directed chief electoral officers. We have 36 states and union territories in the Republic of India, and there are 36 chief electoral officers, and they have been asked to ensure that the publicity material which is used should be as per the government guidelines, and at all costs, the single-use plastics should be avoided. Next. The Election Commission of India has also directed the political parties and candidates to use eco-friendly substances for preparing election material in order to prevent long-term deleterious impact of such materials on the environment. Next. Now, it is not just enough to say that don't use single-use plastic or do not use such items which are not biodegradable, but we should also come up with alternatives. Therefore, some of the alternatives are using compostable plastic, natural fabrics, recycled paper materials, etc. The Election Commission of India has been stressing this point. It has been asking the political parties and candidates to rely heavily upon such biodegradable material or the material reusable or recyclable material in order to reduce the effect on the environment. Next. Now, ECI has also ensured that the law of land is implemented in all respects in letter and spirit. It's not just enough to talk about the non-biodegradable material and the effect on the environment. We should also think about the pollution caused by the noise. Being the largest democracy on earth with close to 1.4 billion population, we have 950 million voters in this country. So one can imagine the magnitude of the elections. In fact, next year by this time, we will be going through the general elections to the Parliament of India. So naturally, every political party, every political leader, the candidate would like to use the most powerful means of communication, that is addressing the public. So the noise pollution is also another important subject which is under the radar of the Election Commission of India. So there is a clear-cut direction from the Election Commission of India that under Public Address System Act, the public loudspeakers cannot be used from night 10 p.m. till 6 p.m. morning. Secondly, it has also directed that the decibel levels also have to be under the limits as per the ECI specifications. Next. The defacement of property, this is another thing. In fact, political parties, candidates used to resort to large-scale wall writings, paintings, pasting the posters on the walls, both public property as well as private property. And this in itself would cause a lot of damage to the environment. Therefore, Election Commission of India gave direction that under no circumstances any public property can be defaced by any candidate or a political party. As far as private property is concerned, without the explicit written consent of the owner, no publicity material can be pasted or written on the property of the private person. Next. Now, in order to promote transparency and accountability in elections, the candidates and political parties are supposed to divulge their sources of funding. Now, this includes, they are supposed to adopt sustainable practices in the political campaigns. In fact, their nomination papers, the manifestos, all these things have to be uploaded on the websites rather than going for booklets and their distribution. Even the printing techniques, the eco-friendly ink, in fact, India produces has largest indigo plantation. So such alternatives which are eco-friendly are also encouraged. Next. The manifesto, which is an important tool of the political parties to convey their ideas and their vision for improving the country, are also supposed to be put on the websites, and the manifestos are also shared on the IT media, the social media, and other IT platforms. Next. Now, under Section 39F of Representation of People's Act, the Election Commission has also provided, in addition to encouraging the political parties to resort to eco-friendly political campaigning, Election Commission has also provided them a platform for them to reach out to the people in a most eco-friendly manner, that is using the television and the radio. The state-controlled media, both television as well as radio, All India Radio, have to provide fixed number of hours during the election period to the recognized state and national parties. Each political party, there are two buckets in that. In the first bucket, each recognized political party will get about 45 minutes of time, both on All India Radio as well as Indian television, 45 minutes each. And remaining 20 hours, it will be shared among the recognized political parties as per the voting percentage, as per the votes they garnered in the previous elections. So they also get this is free of cost. In addition to that, political parties and candidates are free to spend their money and use the private television channels or radio channels to address the voters. However, from ECI side, this facility is given to them so that they will be able to spread their message to the voters. Next. Now, we also conduct what is called baseline survey before the elections and also the endline survey followed by the election. One of the important reasons for conducting this survey is to understand that what are the best means of reaching out to the electors and also so that this information can be shared with the political parties and candidates so that they will use the same means to reach out to the public. For example, when such survey was conducted before general elections in 2020, it came to light that television is the most effective medium for sharing the information about the elections. So now we have encouraged, even the government as election body, election management body, we reach out to the people largely to the television because that is the best medium of reaching out to the people. Similarly, now the political parties and candidates are also reaching out to the voters through electronic medium. So this has established, the survey has established that what is the better means of reaching out to the people, which is an most eco-friendly means of reaching out to the people. Next. Now coming to the social media, which we cannot live without that. Now that is cost-effective way of reaching out to the large number of people, even though misuse, abuse, these are part and parcel of this social media campaign. But however, we have restrictions of using this media for any kind of malicious campaign against any political rival or any group or race. However, the political parties and candidates are encouraged to use social media handles like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, others for spreading campaign messages, post updates, and also engage with voters and create both audio and video material for reaching out to the voters. Next. The political parties, in addition to using the paper-based or PVC-based or plastic-based materials to reach out to the people, we encourage them to reach out to the voters in one-to-one contact, door-to-door campaign. In fact, 2 days before the actual poll, all kinds of campaigning come to standstill. We do not allow any candidate or political party to use loudspeakers and things like that. But however, the candidates are free to go from house to house of the voter, requesting them to vote for a particular candidate. Next. Now, the Election Commission of India has always led. Taken measures to ensure that our elections are fair, free, peaceful, inclusive, and participative in all respects. So, the first and foremost measure taken by Election Commission of India is electronic voting machine. As I said earlier, with nearly 950 million voters, 10 lakh, more than 1 million polling stations, one can imagine the amount of paper that would have been used in printing the ballot papers and getting them counted, and their, the number of trees that would have been cut to pave way for printing such large number of ballot papers. So the electronic voting machines have single-handedly reduced, if not almost eliminated the use of paper in the elections. Now, in addition to that, the various complaints would have come in the form of written complaints or written petitions To avoid that, Election Commission of India, and also to make ease of doing business, has come out with voter helpline app for the citizens to lodge their complaint. Similarly, the Saksham C-Vigil KYC. Next, please. I'll briefly close this. Next, please. So election EVMs, I have spoken about electronic voting machine and how it has reduced a large number of the use of papers and also prevented cutting down of thousands of trees. Next. The voter helpline app, this is a citizen-centric app, not only for searching the name and other things, also can file complaints if the voter feels that a particular thing has been violated. For example, he has not got his voter ID card. He can always file a complaint on this. Next. This is especially for PWDs, with all accessible features. They can request for wheelchair. They can request for vehicle for them to get transported from their house to polling station and return. Next. The C-Vigil app, basically it stands for Vigilante Citizen, where a citizen will be able to lodge complaint against political parties or candidates if they are violating the Model Code of Conduct. Next. Know Your Candidate app. This is to strengthen the candidates, the voters, by informing them about the candidates and the political parties, especially the criminal antecedents. Next. Apart from this, ECI has come up with, has a very strong base in social media handles to promote awareness and also to spread the message of protecting the environment without compromising the voters' right to know about the candidates and the political parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We were able to learn from the case examples of India about how they're enabling the eco-friendly elections. Especially this year, India became the world's largest population country. The population of India surpassed that of China. So the electronic voting machine, I believe, is a true innovation. You can prevent a lot of trees from being cut. Also, he mentioned the laws related to the use of loudspeakers. We could talk more about these after all presentations are over.
Let me introduce you the second speaker of the session. The second speaker is from Sri Lanka. She's the professor of geography. Her name is Farina Uzaik. She's also the director of Sri Lankan Development Forum. She's going to tell us about eco-friendly election campaign today.
Are you ready?
Yeah, hello. Can you hear?
예, 잘 들립니다. Yes.
Okay. Wait 1 minute. I want to share my presentation. Hello. Hello, good afternoon from Sri Lanka. I'm very much happy to, present this forum. Thank you, organizing team, for like this, forum is very, very important. This is the timely needed. And before presenting my, my mini research, I want to say brief regarding this, title of the presentation. And, I have conducted mini survey regarding the eco-friendly election campaign. And it was presented in 2020 at the symposium, which was organized by the Election Commission in Sri Lanka. So the background, that knowledge, and I am a geographer and environmentist. I have a very much concern in protecting the environment. So I'm very happy to present this presentation today, this forum. Thank you very much. Yeah, what is eco-friendly election campaign? An environmental friendly campaign is a tangible way to do a campaign that maintains a healthy environment. This can save environment health and it will reduce unwanted cost. Environment-friendly election campaign is a wise and humane way of campaigning for the election, which is also very important for a democratic setup. Especially eco-friendly election campaign will not harm the environment. Why we need eco-friendly election campaign? The elections are essential for good governance and democracy in the nation, but various improper elections affect the physical and mental health of the nation's citizens. Improper election decorations causes flood disaster, sanitation disorder, etc. And it destroys the beauty and cleanliness of the environment. Tourism industry and foreign investments are held back because of this improper election campaign. So it is essential that these elections are conducted in such a way that are waste-free. Waste-free, do not cause any socio-economic and health and environmental impact. Environment is the basis for tourism in order to, future development, the tourism sector in Sri Lanka. Election activities should be carried out in an environmental friendly manner and without polluting the nature or surrounding environment. It should not cause health and physical harm, psychological harm to the individuals and society, and should not slow down the development and economy of a country. This is some of the outcomes of my, field study. Here we can see the human activities that damage the environment during the election. So here you can see the plastic newsletters and using loudspeakers, use of firecrackers, high vehicle usage, plastic usage, plastic decorations, improper waste disposal. I think the previous presenter very much, clearly elaborate what sort of environmental, destruction during the election campaign. I think most of the information the presenter presented the most of the info very much, relation to this my presentation. And these are some of the pictures I collected from the field survey. We can see how much of paper wastage and the plastic PET bottles, and also how it's create the ugly environment, how it's destroy the beauty of the environment. Here you can see most of the time during the election, the firecrackers and the posters and the, different colors posters. It's, the most of the animals also, just taking their feedings, and, here the roadside, beside the roadside, there are many, food packets and the plastic PET bottles. So it's creates a very ugly environment during the election campaign. And also we know normally the plastic and polythene, it's take more than 500 years to degrade. So it's create more, greenhouse gases. It is very harm to the human as well as the environmental health. So the socio-environmental damages during the election campaign, I think this section also very clearly elaborated by the first presenter. Most of the time, the vehicular pollution, noise pollution, paper pollution, color, soil pollution, water. There are so many pollution and environmental destruction occur during the election. So it is end with the actually human health as well as the environmental health. So this is very harm to the nations too. It damage to the economic development too. And these slides show the plans to do so for eco-friendly election campaign. The main strategy used by the political leaders to recruit supporters to their parties and candidates is social media. Banners, flags, brochures, and posters are not necessary. Using these all tools to campaign appears like a pointless endeavors. So accordingly, we can use the green model polling booths, avoid the single plastic use, and use of public transport rather than the individual. Go digital, campaigning materials. There are so many, we are now the people will the digital campaigning material, so we can use that material. And go for environmental friendly and recyclable and compostable campaign materials. And also do not hang and nail track banners, posters on trees, plants, scraps, because actually during the election, period, most of the, surrounding greeneries are destroying. The most of the politician and political, supporters, they are using, they are destructing the surrounding greenery. So we need to stop and we need to give the proper awareness to the supporters and the public to protect how we have to protect during the election campaign, and use how we have to use the nature friendly material. Take down illegal campaign material without waiting to be told. Do not leave garbage during the campaign. So it is makes, there are different garbages. We need to make a proper setup in this regard. So there are so many, nature friendly, materials we need to use during the election campaign. I think I am not, each and everything I'm not going to elaborate, because most of the things are the first presenter very clearly elaborated. So the candidates' plans for the environmental protection should be as follows. These are some of the strategies: minimize the air pollution, effective soil waste disposal, safeguard water resources, particularly safe waste and groundwater, upkeep the natural grasslands and forests, the preservation of national parks and natural areas, use best promotional product for political campaign. These are some of the strategies. So based on the Sri Lankan, eco-friendly election campaign in Sri Lanka, under this, the Central Environmental Authority and the Election Commission in Sri Lanka have proposed regulations that address environmental contamination. These problems wouldn't arise if the politicians who talk about adopting these policies actually did so. It wouldn't do any harm if the Election Commission moves towards establishing it, as none of the aforementioned standard is being met. By pressuring them to abstain from the voting for the politician that employs and develops environmentally harmful tactics, we must educate the general public. To fight this problem, we must educate the general public and enact through legislation from our elected officials. So the last, the presidential election, the former president honored for leading an eco-friendly presidential election campaign. So the zero carbon certificate has been given to former president in recognition of the world first zero carbon presidential election campaign that involved community participation. The presidential campaign maintained environmental pollution and greenhouse gases emission at zero levels, according to the Sustainable Future Group, which is authorized to issue certificates to, on greenhouse gas management. He made the choice to hold more than 150 open rallies as a presidential candidate without using polythene posters, banners, or cutouts. Actually, this is one of the important, we need to highlight this president's election last time, which was occurred. So in future, we need to monitor, we need to, organize the systematic, election campaign without any harm to the environment. Before that, we need to give the effective awareness to the public. They want to know why we need to protect the environment. Actually, we need the election. At the same time, we need to protect the environment. So without harm to the environment, the public as well as the politician need to protect the environment. Before wind up my presentation, I must say, the Sri Lanka is a very beautiful country. Most of the, environmentally, the rich biodiversity, the most of the tourism, international tourism, the tourists are attracted by the, natural environment. So I think as a Sri Lankan, including me, we must have a responsibility to, protect the environment, especially during the election period. And also I must highlight here, not only the election materials and we need, before that we need to, the election commission have a big responsibility to nominate or select the proper environmental conscious politician. First of all, the party leaders and the politicians should have an environmental conscious manner. Then only we can sustain this process. So I think in future in Sri Lanka also we need to work very hard to maintain the environmental eco-friendly election campaign. I think this presentation is I prepared by using some of the primary data and the secondary information. These are some of the references I used to prepare this presentation. Thank you so much. If you have any clarifications or questions, welcome.
Thank you so much. He told us about what we need to do during political campaign. So a former president received an award for carbon zero political campaign. I learned that today. It was very impressive. I think India and Sri Lanka are advanced countries in terms of eco-friendly political campaigning, election campaigns. What is most impressive was that some politicians should not be elected if they are not engaged in eco-friendly campaign. I think we should pay attention to that idea. It was very impressive.
Let me invite the third speaker from Korea. It is Ms. Yang Kyung-ju, Deputy General Manager from K-ECO. She's from the Department of Waste Management, Ulbaro Operation Division. We listened to the presentation of India and Sri Lanka. Now we're going to listen to how K-ECO is enabling eco-friendly election activities. Ms. Yang Kyung-ju, please go ahead. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Yang Kyung-ju from K-ECO. First of all, while listening to the presentations by the speaker from India and Sri Lanka, I learned a lot. And I found that we share common challenges and common issues, so we could make more improvement. Last year, Korea held presidential election and general election, and we thought how we could run the campaign materials in an environment-friendly manner. But considering the timing of election and considering the current legal frameworks and institutions, I felt that we have difficulties in enabling really eco-friendly elections. My presentation is titled "Abandoned Banners Get New Life in Namsan Sky Garden." In Namsan, we created a new space. That new space is made of the architecture materials made from the abandoned banners after election was over. Do you know how many abandoned banners we have every year? This is the figure for Korea. Every year we have 9,220 tons of abandoned banners. The 6th building is one of the highest buildings in Korea. The amount of abandoned banners correspond to 5,524 such buildings. Other speakers from other countries may not know about this building, but this is one of the very high buildings in Korea. And I was surprised to find this amount of abandoned banners. And what about the abandoned banners of the last 5 years? As you see here, 14,000 tons. 14,000 tons of election banners were abandoned. Among them, only 30% was recycled and the 70% was incinerated or burned. I proposed the ratio of recycling of the abandoned banners. For each region, they have different ratio of recycling. In the case of Ulsan, 88.5% of the abandoned banners are recycled, but in the case of Daejeon, the figure is very low, and in the case of Seoul, only 20% of the abandoned banners are recycled. It depends on the philosophy of the leader of the region, and it also is closely related to the circumstance of each region. The amount of election banners would be different depending on the country. In the case of Korea, last year, when I came up with the idea of Namsan Sky Garden, I figured out the amount of abandoned banners. In 2022, we had the nationwide simultaneous local elections. And there we had about 128,000 banners. It corresponds to 1,281 kilometers. That's the distance between Seoul and Tokyo. In 2022, we had presidential election from which we had 105,000 banners. And I am showing you this the image of the presidential election materials that were used last year. And what about the impact on the environment? From environmental perspective, the campaign materials have a great influence, as you see here. In 2018, we held the local elections. Banners created from those local elections, as well as the bulletins and posters, amount to this correspond to the amount of carbon dioxide generated from 4 million plastic cups, and the greenhouse emitted from the production of these election banners correspond to the amount of CO2 to be observed by such a large number of pine trees. So we use election banners and bulletins so much that the earth is suffering a lot from the environmental problems. As I proceeded with the Namsan Sky Garden project, actually the Namsan is located in Seoul. Seoul is the capital of Korea. I called the districts in Seoul and asked if they are willing to join my efforts to recycle the wasted banners. Most of the districts said it would be difficult for them to join my efforts because the cost for burning the materials amount to about 300,000 Korean won. Actually, they are burning the abandoned materials, which would be the easiest way to process the abandoned banners. But in the process of burning the materials, hazardous substances are produced, including dioxin, the carcinogen. Then let's have a look at how we are recycling the wasted banners. And Sri Lanka and India are facilitating recycling of the campaign materials. In the case of Korea, the Ministry of Environment selects local authorities and local governments that are good at recycling these wasted banners, and the Ministry of Environment provide the government subsidies to the local authorities that produce the recycling of the wasted banners. So here I listed the names of 22 local governments that are recycling the wasted banners. The wasted banners are turning into eco bag, into umbrella, and into ropes, as you see on the picture on the right side. And also solid fuel is recycled into umbrellas. While looking at these cases of recycling, I felt that there were so many abandoned banners, and I thought it is difficult for us to recycle all of the wasted banners because the volume is so large. In the case of the umbrella, that's the case example from Tongyeong. In summer, we use umbrellas a lot, but we have to make the umbrella in a way that resists the water. We need to have waterproof umbrella, and that will cost you more money. And in order to produce umbrella out of the wasted banners, and if you want to do some treatment like waterproof treatment on the umbrella, that will cost more money. And these days I am going through discussion with many local authorities about how we could effectively recycle and reuse the abandoned banners. Then it's not really easy to recycle the wasted banners. I found the reasons like this. While proceeding with the Namsan Sky Garden project from last year, I found that the citizens have doubts about the quality of recycled products because we have to first clean up the abandoned banners, and usually the materials used for election campaigns are made of cheap, low-quality ingredients or materials. So once we recycle the wasted banner, the consumers think that the quality will not be good. This is a pouch we created by recycling the materials of abandoned banners. We recycled the banners, the wasted banners from the election of a local city in Korea, and we turned them into a small pouch. The picture you see on the pouch is the logo of the local bank in Korea, which contributed to the recycling of the materials. The price is about 15,000 Korean won. Maybe the price is higher than $10. Actually, if you visit other shops or stores, you can buy a more beautiful pouch with lower cost, but the recycled product is priced higher. And when we recycle these wasted banners, we need to separate straps and rods, and in many cases, the local authorities are lack of manpower and budget to do all those processes, and the wasted banners include the face and numbers of the candidates. It's not easy to recycle them. And this is recycling of the election banners, which is being sold at 6 won per gram.
So we thought about if there is any new way, and we came up with the idea that we can turn wasted banners into construction materials. K-Eco and Lotte Home Shopping and Seoul Education Office worked together, and we used 22,860 clothes in stock, and with that we created a Namsan site. This is as large as 100 pyong. This is called the Namsan Sky site, and we used the construction materials out of the waste banners. As you can see in the pictures, many Seoul citizens are visiting the site. It is like a shelter for Seoul citizens. Lastly, I created this video that will show you Namsan Sky Path. Is there any way not to harm the environment for the next generation? Do we always have to end up throwing wasted banners? Can we reuse them? To address this issue, we started working together. Wasted clothes from Lotte Home Shopping and 5 panels from K-Eco were used to create this site called Namsan Sky Path. To create this path, we signed an MOU between these organizations, and we tried to recycle wasted fiber, and our purpose and objectives was to protect the environment. In this era of climate crisis, this site will remind us of the importance of environmental protection for this generation and for the next generations to come. We have to protect our environment.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 환경.
Good afternoon. I'm working for the Department of Waste Management at Albara Operation Division at K-Eco. My name is Kyung-Ju Yang. We thought about how to protect the environment, so we wanted to create a model that has not existed before, that didn't exist before. Normally, wasted materials, recycled materials were used for fashion items, including pencil cases. But I came up with this idea. Actually, I ran into this idea over the internet. I think that was a great idea, which was about using fiber panels. And we can use wasted banners to create fiber panels. While planning for Namsan Sky Garden, I thought it is more important to reduce generation of waste in the first place. But personally, I think it is almost impossible to make that happen. So I hope in the future, I think every citizen will agree with me. That is, election campaigns that have minimal impact on the environment. We are living in an era of climate crisis. Everyone is working hard to reduce their carbon footprint. It is a time for making changes. So let's work together. Thank you very much.
그럼 바로 이어서 토론으로 넘어갈 텐데요. 그 사이에 잠시 인터넷 접속에 문제가 생겨서 줌이 끊겼다고 해요. 그래서 지금 복구 중이긴 한데 혹시 줌에 계셨던 분들이 지금 제 말을 들을 수 있으신지 모르겠는데 유튜브를 검색해서 2023
But if you search for 2023 Seoul International Forum on Elections through YouTube, you can join us. And please stay with us till the very end of the forum.
세 분의 발표를 들었는데요.
So we listened to the three presentations.
아마 오늘 저희가 초대한 인도나 스리랑카
Today we invited presenters from India and Sri Lanka. And I believe that not only the three countries that are present today, many other countries would be thinking very seriously about how they could enable environment-friendly elections. We are living in the era of climate crisis, and it is very important to create an election culture without carbon dioxide emissions. And as we move on towards this direction, there could be many challenges and obstacles ahead of us. We have not yet received questions from the online audience. Then we listen to the presentations from the three speakers. As Ms. Yang Kyung-ju said, in managing the waste, the most important thing is to reduce the amount of waste being produced. So reducing the waste itself is very important. Then what are we going to do with the abandoned or wasted banners? Unless we have solid legal frameworks, we will just continue to see the creation of abandoned banners or waste. So having laws and regulations are very important. And when I wrote a column in 2018, I proposed that we could turn the wasted banners and election materials into, for example, shoes. And we can distribute the recycled shoes to, actually not the shoes, but the shoes bags. So we could create a bag that hold the shoes for students out of the materials coming from elections. So let me ask questions to the first two speakers regarding the use of social media. Both the Indian speaker and the Sri Lanka speaker mentioned a lot. In the case of Korea, internet penetration rate is almost 100%. And so many people in Korea are using smartphones. But still, depending on the age of people, depending on where people live in Korea, and also depending on their educational background, people have different level of access to information. In the case of the India, the internet penetration rate is about 50%, and I heard from the Indian speaker that some of the Indian people are actually not literate. Then in India, you need to ensure the people's right to know. And if we use digital media such as SNS or social media, then there are people who cannot access digital information. There are a group of people who have less access to digital media and digital information. And if you promote the use of digital media for elections, those group of people will not really be guaranteed their right to know for election. Mr. Srinivasa, could you first make comments on what I have just mentioned?
Absolutely, I agree with you. If you could recall, what I said was that the Election Commission of India, in addition to other modes of facilitating the political parties and candidates to spread their message among the voters, also encourages the political parties and candidates to use the social media. In fact, in a state like Bihar, which is having highest population density in the country, 40% of the population is less than 18 years. So 18 years is the cutoff for becoming a voter. So in the voters falling in that range, say 18, 20, 25, that is the population category which uses social media to the maximum extent compared to other age cohorts. So when we say that use social media handles also to spread the message, we are targeting at that younger generation rather than the older generation. We also need the younger generation to know about the value their vote carries, the necessity for them to participate in the election, which we call it the largest festival of democracy. Is that because we are seeing some kind of an apathy among the younger generations. Therefore, we want to reach out to them, the media which is closer to their heart, that is social media.
Maybe we need to take an approach that is tailored to different age groups. In the case of Korea, in the case of the elderly people, the Kakao Talk is one of the famous SNS service used by many people. In the case of Korea, we could also use the SNS, for example, Kakao Talk, that is being used by both young generation and older generation. We could use the Kakao Talk to deliver information to the voters. And in the case of Korea, banners or leaflets, as well as a package of thick paper materials are used and distributed to people during election season. And I don't think we must distribute such paper materials. Maybe we need to provide such materials to people who really need them. For example, in the case of the elderly people, they have difficulties in using SNS. And if they have poor eyesight, then we need to provide information that is easy to read for the elderly generation.
In Sri Lanka, also suggested the active use of SNS. Are there any issues associated with social media?
Yeah, well, the nearly 36% of the voters are youngest. And can you hear? Hello? Okay. The nearly 36% of the voters are youngest. And also, the post-COVID, most of the young and the adults, all the people are using the smartphone. They also very much familiar with the, social media. I think that this is the time, in Sri Lanka, currently we are facing not only dollar crisis as well as the paper crisis also. So I think this is the time we have to think and plan the future, election campaign using the digital, format. I think now the young, and also I must say here, nearly 92% in Sri Lankans are, if we take the educated or the literacy level, 92%. So I think this is the good opportunity or good background. The most of them are using smartphones and they have enough knowledge in the digital, platform. So we can, promote through social medias to the plan this election campaign in the electronic and the digital versions. That is, I think, in future that we can we plan and we can keep the sustainability also.
In the case of Korea, Korea is the IT powerhouse. Many Koreans are using SNS very actively, and we have not been very aggressive in using SNS for election campaigns, and I feel sorry for that. And I hope that the National Election Commission of Korea could create such a program to promote the use of SNS. And the Constitutional Court of Korea have recently announced that by July 30th this year, we will have to enact the laws and regulations regarding the use of loudspeakers during election campaigns. So caring about environment is not just about reducing the use of paper. We should think about the impact of election campaigns on the health of human beings. And that's why it's important to regulate the use of loudspeakers. And Korea needs to make more use of IT technology. And it was very impressive that India adopted electronic voting machine, and India saved a lot of trees from being cut. And having electronic voting machine is related to whether the people can trust the government's voting machine or not, because someone could manipulate or distort the voting process by misusing or abusing the electronic voting machine. So I think that we need to get more trust from the citizens, trust in the electronic voting machine as well. And Ms. Yang Kyung-ju, would you like to make more comments? Because while listening to your presentation, I wanted to ask whether the visitors of Namsan Sky Garden know that the garden was made of the recycled materials, and not only banners, but also many types of paper materials and leaflets, and the banners worn by the election staff exist. Also, there are many types of clothing we use for election campaigns. There are many types of T-shirts or clothing people use for election campaigns. We need to think about how we're going to recycle them. And in many cases in Korea, during election campaigns, there are many vehicles with loudspeakers, and many of the election vehicles are driven by diesel fuel. Maybe you need to change them to electricity vehicles.
Before we created the Namsan Sky Garden, we created some information that showed the history of the garden, and we also try to show how much wasted banners were used for Namsan Sky Garden. Otherwise, there is no point in creating such an eco-friendly site. We wanted to share the information with all the students across the nation, so we share the information with educational offices across the nation, and we invited students to the site so that they can have a first-hand experience. Does it cost a lot? It is kind of difficult to have fiber panel in wider use because it is expensive. If you look at the cost, you will see the banners should be compressed to create a fiber panels, so it doesn't cause any environmental impact. But the only problem, the biggest drawback, is the cost. But if we can better use the fiber panels, we can lower the cost. Now we are creating only a small amount of fiber panels, so it is expensive. But if we can produce them in a larger amount, the cost can go down. As you mentioned in your presentation, it is important to reduce the generation of waste in the first place. And I was also impressed by the phrase color pollution in the presentation by Dr. Farina Rodek. Posters and banners, they use a lot of colors and they distract your vision. So I was wondering what the definition of color pollution is. What is the definition of color pollution? What is color pollution?
Yeah. Color pollution means, during the election period, these people are using the different, the dye colors, different dyes for the, preparation of the, posters and the, different, they are drawing some pictures. Actually, at the end of the day, the posters and everything, it goes to the mix with the water bodies. It's pollute the, surface as well as the groundwater. After that, what happened, who are using that water bodies, the people and the, the fish community and everything, especially the water ecosystem is damaged as well as the it's lead to damage the human health. So these kind of activities I think normally happening during the election period. That's why I just mentioned the colored. The colored means the they most of them are using the when they design the posters different colors. I mean, yeah, you see.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
예, 알겠습니다. Yeah, I see. I can understand. 그 시각 자체가 주는 그런 현란함 때문이라기보다는
It's not about distraction of a vision, but about the dyes used for posters and flyers can cause some negative impacts or pollution in our environment.
저희가 약속한 시간이 다 되었습니다. 오늘을 계기로 해서 사실 우리나라 같은 경우에는 지금 터치 포 굿이라는 그 환경 단체가 있어요. 거기에서 친환경 선거 체크리스트라는 게 있어서 후보자들이 자신들이 정말 친환경 선거를 했는지 체크하고 만약에 그렇게 했으면 그걸 또 홍보해서 본인들이 친환경 선거를 치르고 있다 이렇게 알릴 수 있는 방법이 있기는 하지만
political
그
parties
부분에
and
대해서
candidates can
많은
use
그
this checklist to
유권자들이
let voters know how eco-friendly they are. And voters also need to have the mindset putting importance on the environment. They need to consider eco-friendliness when they select the candidates for the politicians. And as in the case of India and Sri Lanka, we need to establish strong laws and regulations to prevent the election campaigns from doing harm on the environment. And also we need to create the environment-friendly culture in our election campaigns. If you visit the website of the National Election Commissions, you can find all the information you need for election. Actually, we don't need the paper materials. If you use the menu in the website of the National Election Commission, you can find information about the candidates of certain elections. So please be aware that the National Election Commission of Korea has the website where you are provided with information about the political party and candidates. So I would like to emphasize the importance of such a menu. Thank you very much for your participation in the second session. I hope that the discussions we have today will eventually lead to the fruits. I hope that what we discussed will be reflected in our policies so that we can create eco-friendly election culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the presenters, moderators, and the members of the audience. We sincerely apologize for the connection problem. This concludes the 2023 Seoul International Forum on Elections. I hope that everyone has enjoyed today's forum and has found it informative and helpful. I wish you all the best and look forward to meeting you in person at our forum next year in 2024. Thank you.